Hello. This might have easily been the most busy day of my life. Got up really, really early. Went to the deepest, darkest woods of southeastern Kentucky to my cabin. And, oh man, I got back late. Took a shower, gassed up the car, washed it because my truck was covered in mud. Because it's been wet here lately. I keep getting asked about intelligence and IQ before making this video on Akasha. And of course Akasha goes by several different names, and everybody keeps bringing up intelligence. Intelligence is silver relative to gold. Intelligence, or episteme, i.e. empirical knowledge, goes no further than death. It actually, and quite often does, vanish before death. Bad car wreck, brain tumor, you get your brain scrambled, and maybe boxing, you can't really remember anything anymore. Intelligence is fool's gold, and people will say this stuff either about me or in reference to intelligence in live stream. And intelligence, I've never, even at a very early age, knew and never confused intelligence with gnosis or wisdom. And of course, wisdom is just a silly word in reference to self-proximity. Now, let's go into Akashic Records here. This is a video a lot of people had asked for, and unfortunately, it is nearly entirely associated with the Madame Blavatsky's Theosophical Society, but it actually went by different names, but there's a lot of nonsense built around it. Akashic Records has about as much nonsense around it as does Karma, and the word reincarnation, and a few other words that everybody loves to throw around but doesn't really understand, and has a lot of false attribution thereof. Akashic Records used to go by, in the ancient Pali, of which I'm a translator, of Dibakahu. You could crudely translate Dibakahu as heavenly eye, but it refers to being at the nexus of all potentiality. It also goes by apophaticism. As Plotinus mentioned at the end of his Enneads, monos pros monon, from the one to the one, the nexus of all potentiality and possibilities. This is actually right after the New Age movement and all the stuff that I have no association with vis-a-vis quantum and relativity. It actually got its own little scientific name and called simultaneity. Also used to go by Antiplace. Now these are a bunch of words. I know you want me to get to the heart of the Akashic Records. And of course Akasha is just the Sanskrit word for the ether, not atmosphere. You'll actually see that in a lot of different things. Well, Akasha means ether or atmosphere. Depends on the context you use, just like logos, however. By the way, C.W. Ledbetter's clairvoyance book from 1899 associated the term with the idea that was complete in that book, identified the Akashic Records by name as something clairvoyant could read. There are actual, and it's extremely rare, it's even more rare these days to find a true clairvoyant because of everybody's attached to their iPads and their iPhones, and their mind is literally extremely turbulent, and you can't be anything close to clairvoyant or be able to see purely and simply if you're distracted by all the nonsense. And of course all the EMF now that our bodies and brains are bombarded by. If people could actually see the EMF that bombards our bodies and our brains every microsecond, people would run in terror if you could actually see that. This is why everybody should have a frequency counter, by the way. Frequency counters are great for seeing the EMF that's bombarding you and the SNR, the signal to noise ratio, but it also tells you if you've got a bug in your house or in your hotel room. Everybody should get a frequency counter. They used to be kind of expensive. I've had a few of them. Now they're relatively cheap. Anyway, getting back to simultaneity, and I don't care if people say Akashic Record is Antiplace, or in the ancient Pali is a reference to Dibakaku. I like to make a simple analogy. However, if you're looking for the detail, this is the reason why I'm writing the Retroduction booklet, because true THEURGY or apophaticism, the via negativa, that can take you there, and there of course is an incorrect word. There is a topos, meaning a place, in spatiotemporality with an XYZ coordinate in space and time. And it is not somewhere at all. It is not a where at all. It is an anti-where. This, of course, is not a word. Neither really is counterspace, but what would be opposite to spatiality? Spatiality, of course, is the after effect of a divergent magnetic field. So what would the Akashic records be where answers can be had? And if you think you're going to find the answers to an elaborate patent in the Akashic records, or I actually prefer to call it the Bakaku. I really don't want to make a whole lot of, even though this is where Akashic records came from, the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky, and specifically C.W. Ledbetter. We're talking about a place of simultaneity where time has no meaning. It is not a place, it is not a space, and it is not a where. People will ask you how you want to get there, and the question is already preloaded with the fallacy that it is a where or a place that your psychophysical body or even your consciousness can go to. But consciousness has a beginning in time and an end in time, and it has a specific locus within and coordinate to this body. You can't take your consciousness there. A true clairvoyant actually can see what is underneath. I like to make movie references because people get confused when I use some of these terms to make references. I think they called it in a movie, they called it the underverse. We could say counterspace, we could say 0 point. But what would be the nexus of all pure potentiality and possibility before space and time, before place, where everything is a singular expression? This is where, right after the New Age movement, the relativists came up. When this is one thing, they kind of got right. However, they're approaching it from an existential, empirical perspective relative to the idea of space and time. They referred to it as simultaneity. Asked the question by Ledbetter in his book, said, what is the Akashic field? And is the book of life, said the record that the individual entity writes upon the skein of time and space through patience is opened when self is attuned to the infinite. And this is just saying, a fancy way of saying, because nothing is known except through the modality of the knower, that you're at the nexus of all pure potentiality, i.e. at the plane of inertia relative to everything that, because time doesn't exist. It does exist conventionally, and of course I talk about time, and people leave a comment and they'll say in live stream, I thought you said time doesn't exist. And ultimately it does not. Conventionally, however, it does. The ancient Indians referred to this as the rope snake analogy, and they'd actually debate about it and talk about it endlessly. How can something that doesn't exist affect you? Kind of like if you were to, the ancient analogy of the rope snake is you step outside to relieve yourself in the middle of the night, and there's no cure for snake bites, and if you saw a piece of rope thinking it was a venomous snake and it scared you to death and you literally did die, you know, how could you be affected by something that doesn't exist, since there was no snake there to begin with, yet you had the fear upon seeing a piece of rope that it was a snake. Goes on from Clairvoyant's book. It said, is this God's remembrances? And of course, I reject the facts, and so does Plotinus and all of Pythagoreanism and Platonism, that the absolute is consubstantiality of sentience, i.e. a G with a capital G, O-D, of remembrances. And he says in the book, so this is the book of life, and the question is the Akashic records, and they said those are made by the individual, just as indicated, but at a point of simultaneity, past, present, and future have no meaning. Getting back to time, it does exist, of course, conventionally, but it does not exist ultimately. And I brought this back from Florida. I've got quite a few hourglasses. The other ones are too big and fragile in Florida. But the inverse of all potentiality, if this is past and this is future, of course we flip it around, and now this is present, even though present is purely conceptual. There's no such thing as a present moment. No one can ever set foot in the same waters twice, nor can anybody point to the present, because once it, of course, is pointed to, then it is already past. It is purely conceptual in ideation of the flawed understandings of human beings regarding the cosmos nuitos and the cosmos athethos, i.e. the ultimateity of everything that is both known or unknown, that we have this idea of presence or past or future. We certainly can't travel back to the past, but what if you could stand at the point where time does not exist? And this, of course, is what references the plane of inertia, or what they refer to, Ledbetter, and the Theosophical Society adopted this, and I really have no love of the Theosophical Society. However, there were people and members of the Theosophical Society that were true seekers. However, there's a whole lot of, shall we say, nasty baggage that is associated with the Theosophical Society. I will not get into that, but this is one point where actually Dr. Anandakitish Kumaraswamy was wrong. He called it as like a fake or a quack movement in the Theosophical Society. And while there is a whole lot of negative baggage that's around it, there are a lot of genuine seekers that really wanted to know nothing other than the true answers of things. And what is this anti-place and this anti-time where all possibilities exist in simultaneity, where you could stand at the nexus of everything and see things clearly? Now, there's not a library of knowledge or like a filing cabinet up in the clouds or some anti-place where you can flip through a filing cabinet. And this is the common misconception of Akashic Records, which is also too, the same baggage that exists around reincarnation, the same baggage that exists around karma. There's just tons and tons of poo that's been piled on and over these many countless decades that people have. They think they know what Akashic Records mean, and they think they know what reincarnation means. Punna bhavati, or again becoming. Polygenesis, as the Greeks referred to it. But the baggage has to be stripped away because everybody comes with countless preconceptions about the Akashic Records. So it's not a place at all, rather the place without place where the answers to all things could be seen simply. This is my writing, by the way. I'm not reading from Ledbetter's book. A place without time, or a place without place, which of course superficially sounds kind of wonky, but it actually is hyperlogical when you're referring to metaphysics or pure ontology. The subjective substrate beneath becoming. And beneath becoming is always in reference, of course, to both ends of this hourglass, or this hyperboloid, that being past and future. What is the inverse to past and future? What is the inverse to the hyperboloidal geometry of this particular hourglass, for example? It would be right here. However, there's a little spatial rift right here where the sound actually flows both ways, but, in the true hyperboloid of the metaphysical substrate, which is what the Theosophical Society referred to as the Akashic Records, is not space, it is not time, it is anti-time, it is anti-space. I say counterspace, but that sounds like such a wonky word, and I've of course been criticized for it, even though I'm not the one that initiated the use of that word counterspace, where all possibilities are present at one and the same time. If you were to go to the place where there is no time and where there is no space, and everything is seen, and this is more accurate than saying the Akashic Records, the ancient Pali is extremely accurate in referencing what they call the Akashic Records, and they call the Bakaku. You say heavenly eye or astral eye, the eye which takes in all things, can see everything clearly, but itself does not emit anything. And this, of course, would be at the inertial point of absolute rest. The true definition of inertia, by the way, is counterspace. No release of energy at all. Past, present, and future, everything is seen. But, people think if you go to the Akashic Records, then, there's the answer to future energy problem. Or there you could see a patent which will be developed into the future. And there's no being on this earth that I've ever heard written anywhere, whether it be fantastical or otherwise, that has made that statement. There might be some, weirdo gurus that are actually, and predicting the future is true. If there is enough of a wake in the future, actually if one is clairvoyant enough, and clairvoyance, just like wisdom, is a silly word for self-proximity. Clairvoyance is a clarity of vision where one has Dibakaku. If you actually took a true clairvoyant, of which there are extremely few alive today into the distant past, they would say this is a person imbued with Dibakaku, or Amapanasati. If I were to translate that, it would make no sense to you. Specifically, it is about Platonic anamnesis, where you're retroducted to the point of pure recollection, where past, present, and future are all present at the same time and yet not flowing, where everything is perfectly visible. Pure clarity of vision, but not clarity of ocular vision of light that's entering your eye. Rather, of course, and the Indians have been talking about this for countless millennia, thousands and thousands of years, the third eye. If you're to enter the third eye where things become clear, and actually true retroduction is like that. You don't have objective proof for metaphysical substrates and principles, so how do you gain understanding into the nature of how to get there? And of course it is not a there once again, and the answer is retroduction. Explaining that, unfortunately, is quite difficult, and I am working on that booklet right now, as I've been proclaiming now for basically a year. But you can't jam that into a 20-minute video. I wanted to talk about, since people asked me to talk about it, the Akashic Records. So this is not a filing cabinet up in the sky where you could thumb through, you know, what your sister ate yesterday. However, with enough clairvoyance, you can actually see an imprint of that. However, the bigger the disturbance, and I said like a disturbance in the force, right? I hate to actually talk about that. The bigger the disturbance of what is to come, true clairvoyants have actually predicted the future. The CIA had the program of remote viewing where you could astral travel, but that is actually traveling to a specific place and time by projecting yourself there through disembodiment. So Akashic Records is certainly not astral travel, and it is not remote viewing. It is going to the nexus of all possibilities where past, present, and future do not exist. And of course, ultimately, time does not exist. Time exists out here for those of us who are born, get old, and suffer and die, either hemisphere of the hyperboloid, but it doesn't exist here. So time, of course, does exist conventionally, but not ultimately. True metaphysics is always actually hyperlogical. It is not, you know, a leap of faith. You just have to believe. Well, that's crazy. Yeah, but you just have to believe it, you know. Genuine metaphysics is absolutely never, ever like that, you know, requiring some, you know, absurd, you just got to believe it, you know, eventually you'll see it. You know, that's New Age movement. That's white lighter crystal rubber stuff, and I don't care if anybody's into that. That doesn't interest me at all. So what is the place where you could actually see everything, both past, present, and future, with near perfect clarity as to the nature of the flow of everything? But be able to see the flow of everything vis-a-vis the river of life, you know, back up there, the waters, that would be the past, what's passing you currently, which you can never stick your finger in. If you stick your finger in the present and the river, you know, for a microsecond of a microsecond you are, but it still doesn't exist. And over there, of course, is the future. The only way you could actually see that is to be removed from the antinomies, the polarization of time, because time is polarized. Being existential beings, we of course suffer that polarization. So where does clairvoyance exist? Where does the Akashic Records exist, or what the ancient Scythians, i.e. Sakya, would call Dibakaku? This place that was also too called the goal of which Anapanasati was actually cultivated such that you would reach that place, which is not a place at all. Don't you have to be out of the rivers to see the past, present, and the future of the waters, you know, clearly? You certainly can't be in the waters to see it with clarity. And by seeing, I certainly don't mean visual clarity of seeing. So what would be this plane of inertia? And of course I've been talking about that for years. Walter Russell talked about the plane of inertia. The nexus of true inertia between all possibilities, both what has happened and what will happen, and see things with clarity. We call it the Akashic Records, which is adopted by the Theosophical Society. I prefer not to. Once again, one of the few times I've actually rebel against Dr. A.K. Kumaraswamy's assault on, and he did assault on it in his selected letters of A.K. Kumaraswamy, where the Theosophical Society was really huge at the time when he was responding to those letters. He attacked it endlessly, and he was wrong. He attacked the prima facie bad baggage that was attached to the Theosophical Society, and I won't go into that, but the ultimate seekers are the people that actually talked about the Akashic Records. Of course, nothing is known except through the modality of the knower. Does it really matter if we say Akashic Records or Dibahaku or Anapanasati or the plane of inertia? We're talking about the inverse of all potentiality, which is both manifest, has happened, or will happen, and of course the present is purely conceptual. We can't grab a moment of time. We can't stick our finger in the same waters twice. We can't say, here's the present. You know, you stick your finger in a flowing river or a flowing creek. It's impossible. You know, you've touched it and you recognize the instant at which you touch the water, but the microsecond of the microsecond you've touched it, it's already passed. So time ultimately doesn't exist any more than the so-called present moment does. Moment is purely conceptual also. It's one of the many things that human beings ideate as existing which don't exist, like waves, time, space, shadows. There's about 9 primary things that don't exist that human beings love to talk about. Energy. We'll talk about force, too. Force. Force of what, by what, and due to what. So they call it the Book of Life. It is not a giant filing cabinet in the sky. And it certainly is nowhere. and it is not a place and time. It is a nexus of all pure potentiality where neither time exists, and the clarity, the metaphysical clarity of vision, we call it the heavenly eye, but that's still an incorrect translation. I could translate the Greek word logos, but it would still be inaccurate and suffice to actually say what the logos is. So translating Dibakaku as heavenly eye, it's like, well, that's okay, but it doesn't really make any sense. We're talking about the metaphysical vision of being able to see everything, and there's a reference to, and people know movie references, it makes better clarity for them. Was it 2010? Not 2001, Stanley Kubrick, but 2010, where the guy who had slipped into the monolith, you know, he appears and he says, I can see it all so clearly. Just everything is completely clear. Past, present, and future are not different things. They are one thing. And this would, of course, would be the Akashic Records. But records, of course, everybody immediately thinks of like a filing cabinet, you know, somewhere in a parallel universe or something. And, of course, the Akashic Records are not that. This is a kind of a best movie reference I could think, because people kind of understand that, because I've seen the movie 2010, or at least maybe younger people have not. It's like, I could just see it all so clearly. Now, in the movie reference to the guy that spontaneously blinks into existence to warn the people to get away from Jupiter, it's like, you know, it's all so clear to me now. It's like, what is? Just, you can't explain it. It's like, what is? There's no frame of reference by which you could tell somebody, neither to a true clairvoyant. 99% of the clairvoyants out there, for example, who are in tap with Akashic Records, it's a lot harder now because of all the distractions that we have. 99% of them, of course, are fake, but a true clairvoyant is always there. They can see, step into a house where horrible things happened, and they can see, like, this happened over here, you know, the guy, I'm seeing a guy attacking, you know, a woman, and this horrible thing happened below, you need to dig in the basement over there. Like, oh yeah, we dig and we found a skeleton. True clairvoyants are incredibly rare, and people, of course, don't believe in them, generally, because most of them are fake. But these clairvoyants are an objective way that I could actually point to people that are perpetually, not perpetually, but can, in an instant, tap into, and I hate to say Akashic Records, say the nexus of pure potentiality where past, present, and future and possibilities are one point where everything is absolutely clear. There's no distinction of past, present, and future. You can see clearly the nature of things, what has happened, what will happen. You can see, and once again, it's completely unrelatable. And I'm not trying to be obtuse in saying that. I really am not. And I've neglected to discuss the topic of Akashic Records for a long time. It's like discussing the pyramids. You know, everybody told me to talk about the pyramids, and I did, and of course it generated a lot of comments. But everybody has a million preconceptions about the pyramids, and nearly the same thing exists with the topic of Akashic Records. But whatever you call it, it's the nexus of all pure potentiality where everything, past, present, and future, possibilities, are seen with brilliant clarity because you are inverse to everything that all the rest of us live in. We're living, everybody's living in fear of the past and fear of the future, you know, birth and death. Everybody's living over here. When you stand here, you can't even talk. It's like you're a complete alien. When you're standing right here, not literally standing, when you're standing right here, you can't talk with the young and the old, people that are worried about the past, living in the past. They're in the future, they're in the present, they're worried about the past, they're in the present, and they're worried about the future. This isn't really the present, of course. The flow of everything from one side to the other is actually the present. We could point to any grain of sand as it slips from one side to the other as the present. This isn't the present. This is the inverse of possibilities. Possibilities which have happened and possibilities which will happen. So giving a frame of reference to relate it to people is nearly impossible. And the reason for that is hyperlogical. It is not nonsensical or flowery or any sort of white lighter answer. I hope I cleared up at least 20% of the premise of Akashic Records, since an enormous amount of people want me to talk about it. If you ever want to contact me, my email's in the description below. It's been an extremely long day for me. Lux Veritas. Have a happy new year.